All right, everyone. So we've spent the last couple of our videos here discussing this idea about diversification strategies and kind of all of the nuances that accompany it. So we've talked about a myriad of things. What are related versus unrelated diversification? What does it mean actually to be diversified? How do we make good decisions in that sense? But we also know that part of this class is going to be being able to strategically analyze those approaches used by other firms. And so I thought the most helpful way for us to finish up our conversation here is just to walk through this quick and easy process model here about how we evaluate a diversified firm's strategy. How do we look at their current strategy and determine what's going wrong, what's going right? What does the future kind of look like for this organization? So we see six key steps here. So we're going to break these down one by one and just talk a little bit about how do we actually come to a conclusion about how well is this firm really doing with their diversification decisions at this point? And heck, we can even put it to use for our own in the future. So our first step here, as it says, is really just to assess how attractive each of the industries are going to be long-term. We're always looking to the future. We want to assess things may look good now, but what's the long-term health look like for these industries? Are these attractive or not, right? So we're going to look at each of the industries and say, do each of these industries actually look like they're a good one to be in? How do they look from a market size and projected growth rate standpoint? How intense is the industry competition within them? All of these things that we've talked about when we went back all the way back to Porter's 5 forces models of how we assessed our external environment. We want to look at all of these different things within the industries that a business is a part of and figure out which one of these industries is most attractive and which one's not quite as attractive. We want to kind of create a hierarchy of these, right? How appealing is it for then, once we understand about these different industries, how appealing is it for this business actually to be invested in all of these? Is it looking good? Are these all industries that look good? Are there ones that look to be like waning a little bit more or kind of becoming more of a more taxing on the long-term health of the organization if they're present in all of these? Well, basically, we look at these individually and we look at them as a packaged group as they currently are from a diversification standpoint. And we say the more attractive these industries are, the better the prospects for good long-term performance are going to be. Once we've looked at how we assess this element, we move on to looking at the competitive strengths of each business, right? So we do this appraisal and look at each of these businesses, compare our competitive strengths and their market position in each of those industries, because it's not so easy as just saying, yeah, they're a part of this industry. We want to know where do they rank in there as well, right? Because it's one thing to be a part of an unattractive industry at the bottom of it, and it's another thing to be the top performer in that industry. So there's a lot of context that goes into determining whether or not they have good competitive strength within each of these industries as well. We've got to be able to figure out where do they sit amongst competitors. So a lot of times, as it says here, this procedure is going to involve we decide on some set of measures of competitive strength, and then we apply it to each of those different industries. We pick a common metric for performance or something like that. If we want to say or we're looking at performance growth rates or projections, and we say we want to look at those in both. Where do we have the most potential to continue performing well and growing into the future? That might be our metric. We can pick whatever it is as our signal of industry attractiveness in that sense, but we want to apply it across to each of our different businesses in each industry so we understand where we sit amongst a common metric between these different industries. We might look at our costs relative to our competitors. We might look at our ability to match or beat our rivals on key attributes. We might look at our relative market share, our overall, earnings, our brand image and reputation, any of these kinds of things. We can do it on so many levels, it's not even funny. But what we want to do is create this basis for ranking our positions in our different industries from our competitively most strong to our weakest, and then size up the strength of all those business units as a group, where do we sit? Are we looking good in all our industries? Are we falling behind? All these kinds of things we want to take into place. Once we've figured that out, then we have to understand that two businesses might be operating in these multiple industries. However, these two businesses may have very different cross-business strategic fits, right? And remember, we've gone back to this idea over and over. The greater the competitive value of our cross-business strategic fits, the more powerful we are going to be competitively with our diversification strategy. We are looking for cross-business strategic fit. How do we implement elements of this value chain so that we can essentially get like a 2-for-1 situation? We can use something that's established multiple ways, really get the most efficient use out of those value chain steps for ourselves. So we're going to evaluate how much benefit a diversified firm can gain from those value chain matchups, right? Because we know that some of them, they won't get much from it. We can't share much across certain value chains, but we want to figure out now that we understand which industries we're in, how attractive they look, where we're sitting in the different ones. Now we got to figure out where are these cross-business strategic fit opportunities for us to utilize our value chain best and use it as a competitive advantage for us, because that is really the name of the game of what we're going for, and one of the major motivators for why we utilize a diversification strategy in the first place. Once we've gone through there, we want to do what we want to assess a resource fit, right? And resource fit is just concerning whether each company that we have under our parent, right? Each of these subsidiaries in that sense, whether each company has adequate access to the resources that are needed to be competitively successful, and whether or not the corporate parent company has the financial means and the parenting capabilities to support this entire group of businesses altogether. So we look for the diversified firm's collection of exhibiting resource fit by looking at two different kinds of fit. We have financial resource fit and we have non-financial resource fit. Now, financial resource fit is going to include whether or not we as a parent company, do we have the cat, or like, is our firm a cash cow or a cash hog, right? Cash cows are going to be our firms that are going to generate more cash flows than are needed in order to support their internal requirements, right? They're making a lot of money and keeping a lot of money, right? They're generating far more than they need to operate. And our cash hogs are going to be those ones, they have lesser cash flows. They're going to probably need to use some of that excess. They need to pull in more money than they actually make in order to stay, in operation. So we can understand how a cash hog like that, if it was our only business, it wouldn't do anything. It would go under real quickly. But the value of our diversification means that those cash hogs can stay in business because we can pump all that extra money in from hopefully having a cash cow, into our cash hogs and make sure that they can stay in business, right? So the two big questions that we have to ask when we're determining financial resource fit are going to be, first and foremost, do any of the businesses within our portfolio of businesses not contribute positively to achieving our performance goals? Are any of them lagging behind? And does our firm as a whole have enough financial strength to fund these different businesses, right? How much deficits does one of these actually cause? Can we handle that? If so, great. That's one of the advantages to why we diversified. And that may just hint to a business when you're assessing it that they're making good diversification decisions because they're able to operate in areas that usually wouldn't be profitable because they can pump more money into those. The big questions that are going to determine our non-financial fit in here, our managerial, administrative, other parenting capability fit, resource fits are, first and foremost, is there any indication or any evidence, I guess I should say, that indicates that our firm's businesses are resource deficient? Is there anything that's showing that one of them is really lagging behind in non-financial resources, right? Do we just not have the right people somewhere? Can we not support the capabilities necessary for them to operate effectively? You know, are like is the corporate parent's resources poorly matched for what's needed as a result of that? Like, do we just not have the resource necessary to distribute this around and make this an effective undertaking for our larger business? Or, you know, are these resources becoming stretched too thin because we have new resource requirements from our diversification that we just can't meet? Those are all problems. So we want to check to make sure. Essentially, the step 4 is just, do we have the resources necessary to operate the way we need to, because we have now taken on added responsibilities, processes, activities necessary in order to make all of these businesses able to operate successfully. So once we've taken that into account, then we try to rank the relative performance of the different businesses. So, you know, as a rule, it says here, business units that have the brightest profit and growth prospects and really attractive resource fit, they get top priority for allocation of resources. We're ranking these so we can figure out how to allocate those, or in the sense of when we're assessing that, like we're talking about here, figure out if they are giving adequate priority to the correct businesses along there, or are they making decisions to continue pumping money into the businesses that will not create the largest future value for them. So as managers, if we want to make best use of our limited resources, we have to pay attention to this idea that we have to steer our resources toward businesses that have the best opportunities in the future, best performance prospects, and we allocate as few as possible, if any, additional resources to businesses that have the weakest prospects. Some of the time, it may even be we come to the conclusion that we just really shouldn't even be carrying that around in our portfolio of businesses. It's really just too much of a detriment to us. So when we're assessing diversification strategies of other businesses, this is something we have to consider. And then finally, the very end, craft a new strategy. Strategic options to improve diversified firm performance, because honestly, you're usually assessing these in order to craft a new strategy. These will fall into these 5 broad categories of actions. In this case, we won't necessarily be asking you to craft a new strategy that produces a conducive fit through all of these, but just understanding that these 5 areas, these 5 different broad categories of action are usually what we go into trying to craft a new strategy that hopefully identifies those weaknesses we've done through our assessment, figures out how we can utilize our resources, our strategic fit best, all of these kinds of things, allocate them most appropriately, cut off a dead leg where necessary, whatever it is we need to do. These are these 5 broad categories of action we might engage in that are discussed within your readings. Just understanding that these are kind of the starting points, the avenues we might go down after we've successfully assessed a business's diversification strategy, have identified where its strengths and weaknesses lie. How are we utilizing strategic fit? Are we utilizing resources appropriately? Do we even have the resources needed for that? And how do we now adjust our strategic approach so that we can be most conducive to making this portfolio of businesses a complete success?